Thank you so much, Kate Jenkins. First of all, for sharing those really powerful stories. I think, and we're doing a similar story in the documentary, the one about the fruit picker really shows that huge power imbalance and the insecure employment that really does affect so many people and increases the risk of sexual harassment and indecent assault. Also the fact that with a lot of laws it's set and forget, and we need to remind ourselves that we can create this change at this exciting time in history, and how exciting it is to see these global initiatives happening. We are at a tremendous time and we must never forget to take advantage of that. Thank you. You also mentioned bystanders. Now, I think our next speaker will be talking a little bit about that in the research she shares with us. Our next speaker works on the National Community Attitudes Towards Violence Against Women survey and previously coordinated a journalism training project for Sudanese Australians run by the University of Melbourne in conjunction with the ABC. Would you please welcome to the stage Senior Research Officer at Australia's National Research Organisation for Women's Safety, Violeta Politoff.
Hi, everyone. I also want to thank Uncle Bill Nicholson for his knowledge and for welcoming us all here today. So I've been invited to actually talk about the findings from the 2017 National Community Attitudes Towards Violence Against Women survey, or we call it the NCAS for short. But before I begin, I just wanted to briefly talk about and reflect on why we actually study attitudes and why they matter at all. And I think intuitively we all know that attitudes can shape our behaviors and choices, and that what we think other people believe also influences our behaviors and choices. And in the context of violence against women, although someone having problematic attitudes to violence against women doesn't necessarily mean they'll use violence themselves. It does shape perpetration. It can influence how someone understands or justifies, excuses the violence that they use. It influences how victims understand their experiences of violence. They might blame themselves. They might feel uncomfortable disclosing. It also influences the way that the responses that they receive from their community, from their friends, family, colleagues, as well as from institutional responses. So the police or legislations, for example. The survey also provides us with a barometer for social norms and cultures, and I think that's particularly important in terms of thinking about the prevention of violence against women, because we know that shifting these social norms and cultures is kind of one of the key ways of actually preventing the problem before it starts. It also helps to monitor the impacts of investment at a population level. So the NCAS can't tell us whether one program or one particular project has actually changed attitudes, but we can see whether our collective efforts are actually making a change in our communities. So the survey is a survey of 17,500 Australians, 16 years and over, and it's a telephone survey that's done via mobile phone and landline. We look specifically at knowledge and understanding of violence against women. We look at attitudes to violence against women, attitudes to gender equality, and bystander action. So the degree to which people feel they would act if they witness disrespect or sexist behavior. This is a whole of population survey with a large sample size, and due to this sample size, we're able to also look at attitudes within particular communities as well. So we research attitudes among young people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, people from non-English speaking backgrounds, as well as people with disabilities, and we'll be releasing the findings from those first three groups within the next 2 months. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out. Our aims at the NCAS is to benchmark knowledge and attitudes, and then using those benchmarks we can measure change over time. There have been 4 national waves of the NCAS, the first in 1995, the second in 2009, then 2013, and 2017. So we have quite a lot of data to talk about changes in Australian attitudes. We also use the NCAS as a way of strengthening our understanding of what actually predicts these attitudes. So we look at demographic variables and attitudinal variables and consider, well, what are some of the things that most predict people's problematic attitudes to violence against women? It's a partnership with the Social Research Centre, the University of Melbourne, RMIT, UNSW, and Vic Health, and the survey is funded by the Department of Social Services. We have a complex and very rigorous government structure, which we have outlined in our reports online, and it's also one of the key monitoring mechanisms for the national plan. So now on to the results. I'm going to begin with some of the positive findings, and although I focus on the negative ones as we go through, I think it's important to remember that there are good news. There's good news in this data. Overall, most Australians do have a good understanding of violence against women. They support gender equality, and they don't endorse violence supportive attitudes. And there has been actually quite a lot of positive change over time. So in the questions that were asked in 2013, 75% of them have actually shown a statistically significant improvement. At the overall level, there's been improvement in understanding and attitudes to violence against women, as well as gender equality, between 2009 and 2017. And there's been improvement in attitudes among both men and women. However, there are definitely some areas of concern, and I'll be going through those now. So beginning with knowledge of violence against women, and these are sort of things that are, you can really, these are sort of like the black and white questions you can get right or wrong. Overall, Australians' understanding has improved, and we measure this by whether or not people understand non-physical forms of violence as constituting domestic or violence against women. And there has been an improvement in terms of people's understanding of non-physical forms as constituting part of the problem. However, 1 in 5 do not understand that financial control is a form of domestic violence. 12% believe that non-consensual sex in marriage is legal, and a further 7% indicated that they didn't know the answer to that question. 1 in 3 are unaware that a woman is more likely to be sexually assaulted by a stranger than someone she knows. And 2 in 5 don't know where to go for help with a domestic violence issue. So there's still a long way to go in terms of people knowing where to get help, as well as understanding the problem itself. Now, in the survey, in terms of things that have been asked multiple times, we found positive change among almost 75% of the questions. And some of the things showed no change, but there was one area where there was actually a decline in knowledge, and that's around who's most likely to perpetrate, experience fear, and suffer physical harm from domestic violence. There's been a 22 percentage point decline in awareness that men are more likely to perpetrate domestic violence, an 8 percentage point decline in knowledge that women are more likely to suffer physical harm, and a 6 percentage point decline in awareness that level of fear from domestic violence is worse for women. So although things are getting better in some areas, there's some work to be done in terms of the understanding of the gender dynamics of the problem. So we also look at attitudes to gender equality, and the way that we've done this is, and this is kind of a complex chart here, but what I want to show is that we've basically looked at gender equality using 5 themes, and these themes align with our national prevention framework, Change the Story. So the first theme is attitudes around male-peer relations involving aggression and disrespect towards women, rigid gender roles and stereotypes, women's independence and decision-making in public life, and separately private life, and also whether or not people recognize gender equality as a problem in Australia. If you sort of look, you can see that women are the light blue and men are the dark blue. So there's a gender difference across all of the themes, with men falling in the lower support for gender equality category across the 5 themes. And the theme with the most problematic attitudes, with the highest level of support among Australians, is in basically denying gender inequality as a problem. So I've got a couple of examples of questions that sit within this theme. 40% of Australians believe that many women exaggerate how unequally women are treated in Australia. And 50% of Australians believe that many women mistakenly interpret sexist remarks as being, interpret innocent remarks, quote unquote, innocent remarks as being sexist. 16% believe that men should take control in relationships, and 25% believe that women prefer it that way. And more than 1 in 10 believe that men generally make better bosses than women. So even though things are getting better, there's definitely a way to go there. In terms of attitudes to violence against women specifically, we looked at this similar to the other slide, we have 4 themes. Again, so this time the lower endorsement, so the more problematic attitudes sit at the top, and the less problematic at the bottom. So again, the gender difference is visible there. And we looked at attitudes, so within the attitudes to violence against women, they were looked at in 4 themes. So mistrusting women's reports of violence, not believing women, disregarding the need to gain consent, minimizing violence against women, and excusing the perpetrator and holding women responsible. The attitudes that were the most problematic in these themes were mistrusting women's reports of violence. So these are the ones that had the highest agree rates. So one example of this is that 42% of Australians believe that it's common for sexual assault accusations to be used as a way of getting back at men. And 23% believe that many women exaggerate the problem of male violence. We also found that 32% of Australians believe that if a female victim doesn't leave the abusive partner, it's her fault if the abuse continues. We did ask questions around bystander behavior as well. And in particular, we put to people 2 different scenarios. So the first scenario was whether they would be bothered if a male friend of theirs insulted a woman he was in a relationship with, and if they would be bothered if a friend told a sexist joke. And in both people, the majority of people would be bothered. So 98% for the verbal abuse and 76% for the sexist joke. However, when asked what they would do in such a circumstance, only 70% would do something for the verbal abuse and 45% for the sexist joke. So the numbers go down considerably considering the large number of people that would actually be bothered. And there's an important group there as well who say that they would actually like to act, but don't have the tools and don't know how best to do that. So there's definitely something there in terms of scaling people up, and I know that there's been a lot of resources developed in order to do that, and it's one of the things I'm sure we'll be talking about today. We also asked people if they felt they'd have the support of their friends, because research shows that if you feel you'd have the support of your friends or the people around you, you're more likely to actually do something. And although the majority of people would be bothered, people tended to underestimate the level of support that they'd be likely to get from the people around them. We also looked at what the top predictors of attitudinal support for violence are. So we considered things like age, gender, etc., and also the attitudinal kind of measures that we had to see, well, what most predicts someone having a high level of endorsement of attitudes to violence against women. And the far and away, the strongest predictor of attitudinal support for violence was having a low support for gender equality. So basically one of the kind of key findings from that is that the work that we're doing in trying to strengthen gender equality is particularly important because this is going to have a very strong influence on people's attitudinal support for violence. The second and third top predictors are people's understanding of the problem of violence against women and their level of prejudice towards people, depending. So we asked people around their level of prejudice around ethnicity, being same-sex attracted, disability, and aboriginality, and having those prejudicial attitudes was also a strong predictor of attitudinal support for violence against women. So the implications of all of this, there's certainly cause for optimism. We have seen positive changes, but definitely there's more work to be done. And the focus on gender equality, it is a key determinant of attitudinal support for violence, so that is somewhere where we need to keep our focus, particularly attitudes that deny gender inequality is a problem, and those that are around rigid gender roles and the adherence of rigid gender roles, because they strongly predict attitudinal support to violence. Also, the importance of addressing backlash, because a lot of the questions that had a high level of support sort of had that backlash component in them, and I think also shows that a lot of this work is going to be getting backlash as well, so that's an area of focus. There's definitely some room to improve pro-social behavior with bystanders by improving skills, letting people know that they're more likely to have support from the people around them than they might expect, as well as strengthening attitudes and knowledge. I thought I might just put out some ideas of ways that I think the NCAS could be useful to people in this room today. And in addition to, telling you what some of the key areas to focus on. So what are what areas are we seeing the most problematic attitudes, and those are probably the ones we need to shift. But also, the survey itself also helps in myth busting because it provides a lot of data and information around why these things are problematic, why they're wrong. So in terms of trying to persuade people and discuss the issues with them, as well as, we're not there yet. People might think, oh, well, why are we still talking about this? But actually, this shows that we need to continue that conversation. I've got our website. We've developed, there's so much more data and information. I could only give you a small taste of that. And the website, ncas.anrows.org.au, we've got lots and lots of resources. We've got videos, infographics, and reports with heaps of information that might be useful to you. And I thought I'd finish off with a very, very short video that we developed just to give you a taste of what we've got.
When it comes to violence against women, our attitudes matter.
I think you've had enough.
34% of Australians think it's natural for a man to want to show he's in control of his partner in front of his mates, even though being controlling is a key factor in abusive relationships.
Seriously, can't you do anything right?
Hey mate, I think we need to talk.
But most Australians would be bothered seeing a male friend verbally abusing his partner, and 70% would act. As long as we continue to see women as less than equal, disrespect and violence will continue. We all need to help improve attitudes towards women starting now.